Good morning. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 14th Salem Lit Fest. I'm Diane Stern, a member of the great team of volunteers, very hardworking, and Salem Athenaeum and Salem Public Library staff who bring you this festival each year. Those of you who listen to books occasionally or exclusively no doubt share my enthusiasm about this session, Authors Who Narrate. Before presenting our guests, just a few notes. We don't expect any problems, but there is an anti-harassment policy that will be appearing in the chat. It's important to us that everyone feels comfortable. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll try to answer them after our panelists have finished their discussion. For closed captioning, just click on the box that says CC on your screen. So grab a cup of coffee or tea. It's kind of a plug. And I think we should begin at this point with our moderator, Sara Sheckells, who's a familiar face to Salem Lit Fest attendees. A lifelong New Englander, Sara grew up between an indie bookstore and an antique shop. Perfection. Storytelling in all of its forms drew her to cobble together a patchwork of studies in radio, television, and writing. She was a radio host and costume tour guide before launching a long-term career in academia. Sara came to audiobook narration as an avid listener and longtime dabbler in vocal performance. Dark coffee, darker chocolate, and the art of sarcasm are among Sara's muses. Someday she'll get to the pile of books on her bedside table. How many of us can say that? The following panelists have narrated their own works. Matthew Phillion is the Salem-based author of the Indestructibles series of YA super novels, the spin-off series Echo and the Sea, and the fantasy NA series, The Dungeon Crawlers. Book 1 in the Indestructibles series was released this year as a full cast audio produced by Spoken Realms, including himself as Doc Silence. A former journalist, actor, and filmmaker, Matthew also writes about cybersecurity and healthcare. He's a creative director of the Raven Folly Institute Presents. That's the Raven Folly Institute Presents podcast, and can generally be found bouncing plot ideas off Watson, his dog. Petrea Burchard is joining us this morning from the West Coast. She's an author, an actor, a voice actor, and audiobook narrator. Her performing experiences range from improv comedy to Shakespeare, TV, film, and voiceover. She has narrated more than 55 audiobooks and is known as the voice of the space pirate Ryoko. In the anime classic Tenchi Muyo, her book Act as If Stumbling Through Hollywood with Headshot in Hand, soon to be released as an audiobook, is nonfiction about the funny side of life as a journeyman actor. Her critically acclaimed Arthurian time slip novel, which is entitled Camelot and Vine, is available now in audio. Stephanie Willing is a kidlet author and award-winning narrator. She has an MFA in writing for young people from Lesley University. Stephanie narrated The House Guest by Hank Phillippi Ryan. And if you were joining us earlier for the Lit Fest, you'll know that Hank was with us yesterday afternoon in Salem. Originally from Texas, Stephanie now lives in New Jersey with her family, and she never misses an opportunity to visit the dinosaurs at the American Museum of Natural History. So welcome to all of us. And Sara, if you would like to begin. Are you there? Oh, Sara has disappeared for the moment. She's going to return, I'm sure. We've had some, I'll tell you, just a little inside baseball. We had a big power outage yesterday, and she is still without power. She's at her sister-in-law's house, and she's on an iPad. So it's a different setup than her computer at home. So bear with us. But I think we could start. Matthew, do you want to just kind of say how you got into audiobooks and how that started?
Sure. I just had a 9-year-old book become an audiobook. It was a 9-year journey because I was with a smaller publisher. We didn't do audiobooks. They just did, print and ebook. And I was approached by an audiobook production company when I didn't have the rights to the books myself that wanted to produce it. And it took 9 years for me to get to the point where I could kind of make that decision and be the person to make the call instead of relying on the publisher to decide what to do with it. So that was maybe a year and a half ago. And it was just sort of, it was the persistence of people that wanted to see the book in audio, actually, because after 9 years, like, nobody wants a 9-year-old book in audio for the first time. But it was the persistence and staying in touch with the right people and I think actually we benefited from better technology, better access. People knew what they were doing even more 9 years into it than with publishing, it's always the Wild West. We're always learning something new. So that's kind of how, and I had done voice acting before, so I had asked if it was, if I could be one of the characters, and that was my journey. So I'm new to this. I'm nowhere near as experienced as everyone else on the panel.
Do you think you'll do another one?
Yeah, my it's a 5-book series, and I'd love to do all 5. It's just you do the first one as an experiment to see if people are interested, if people want to hear this kind of format, and if they do, I'd love to see the whole series get done. I'd love to see every book I've written in audio, because it was really rewarding to do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, would like to take that question. How did you get into it? What was the driving force? Did you always have sort of an inclination to act? Petrea?
Me? Okay. I just saw a message from Sara, so I was checking to see how she's doing. Yes and no. I actually, as a little kid, I started writing very young. And so when I went to college, I majored in writing and I minored in acting. And then, went off to pursue an acting career, which I did for many years before coming around to audiobook narration. But it seemed like, because I also was a writer and I had written a couple of books, there's Sara, yay. It seemed like kind of natural, especially since I did a lot of voice acting, that I would not only narrate audiobooks, but eventually get around to narrating mine. And I had kind of a similar journey to Matt's in a way, because it just took so long. Because I actually published the book 10 years ago, and I self-published my first novel. And it was well received, but I didn't have the understanding about marketing. And so it didn't really go anywhere. People liked it. That was great. But then just this past summer, I published the audiobook, and now it's back. People are reading it, and now I know how to market it. So it's going a lot better this time around. And it's fun. I love it. I'm proud of it.
Excellent. Good. So can everyone hear me now and see me now?
Hear you.
The wonders of Zoom. So yes, I could see and hear all of you. I don't know, I sort of disappeared into the Zoom ether. So backing it up, thanks to Diane and all of the behind the scenes crew at Salem Lit Fest. It's a pleasure to be here. And I know that you all got started in talking a little bit about your current projects. But if we could just backtrack a smidge and go back to your origin stories of which came first for you. Was it the writing or the narrating, sort of that chicken and egg scenario question? And I'll flip it back to Matt if he wants to start.
Sure. I was going to say, Stephanie hasn't had a chance to talk yet if she wanted to go before me, but
Have a chance.
okay. God, I mean, for publishing the books that came first, I actually was a screenwriter. How about this for an origin story? I was a screen actor, wrote a screenplay, directed a movie. The movie didn't make any money. And so I said, the next thing I'm going to do will be something that I'm the only one who's disappointed if nobody finds it. So like with a book, nobody else is counting on you but you as the author. And of course, that's the thing that found an audience and kind of picked up. So I transitioned completely. I was just lamenting that I don't audition for film anymore because the books keep me too busy. So yeah, I grew up wanting to be a writer, became an actor, then became a writer, and then 9 years into my author career, the opportunity to have the audiobook came along. So when I got the rights back to the books to be able to choose my own production company and all that, and then I'd been doing voice acting work, audio dramas, and podcast dramas and stuff. So I had a little bit of experience behind the mic, and the production company. I asked them if I would be a diva if the author wanted to narrate part of the book, and they're like, "No, it's great. Why not?" So I kind of had like this, what do you call it? The spinning door kind of thing of what side of the mic I was on. So.
All circuitous. So Stephanie, how about you? Which came first for you? The
Oh,
writing, the narrating?
Definitely writing. Writing was the first, like from the very beginning. I know a lot of people experience imposter syndrome, and I definitely experienced that across many different art forms that I have been very passionate about. Writing is the one thing I was always like, no, I'm good at this. I feel good about it. Like, I have doubts within the process? Of course. But like, do I doubt that I have something of value to say? Never. Not like from the time I was little, that was the bedrock. I was a good writer for my age, like, at 5, it's like, oh, that's impressive for age 5, like just like that. I was always a good writer, and I felt that I always wanted to write, but I was super passionate about everything, so I became a dancer, and that was actually my number one passion for a really long time. I wanted to dance, but I was always reading and I was always writing. And then as I got my undergrad degree in dance with a double minor in English and women's studies, and eventually moved to New York City to be a dancer, actor, writer. That was the whole plan. And then it got like super practical. I've always also known that I wanted to be a parent, that I wanted to mom. And so I was like, how do I have a job that like pays for my life, but gives me time to be creative? And at the very beginning, that was teaching Pilates. I taught Pilates for a long time. It was lucrative, and it gave me time to go to rehearsals and auditions and writing classes. But I was like, okay, but that takes me outside of the home. How can I work from home? And I had heard that as a voice actor, you could, you could make some money, be creative, and have kind of a flexible schedule. We could talk about that. But anyway, that was my impression. And I had been acting, on stage for a while at that point. So I did have some acting training. And so I started getting into voiceover. And the whole time I thought, well, I love writing. I love reading. I think audiobooks would be a good fit. But it took a little bit of time to take off. So writing was always there. I was working on the novel that just got published, like while I was making my first commercial demo. Like I've been actively writing the book much longer than I've been, a voice actor or narrator. So that definitely, it was a passion adjacent job that became something I'm very passionate about. So now I'm very lucky. I have 2 things that I love to do that keep me impossibly busy. There's no way to do it all.
That's amazing. Amazing. And, certainly being a parent in there as well is more than a full-time job.
Indeed.
Petrea is someone else who has adjoining careers and crossover career paths. So Petrea, could you talk to us about your journey and in terms of which came first, the writing, the narrating, the voicing? I did start writing first. I have a thing on my website that I wrote when I was 6. If anybody wants to see it, on the back of scratch paper, a story that I wrote that my mother kept. And I think it's called The Littlest Pumpkin, but it's not really spelled like that. So anyway, but I was a good writer, like Stephanie. I was a good writer for my age. And it's hard to say that one really came before the other, because I was always a performer. I liked performing. I did plays when I was little, and I wrote a play for myself and my friends to perform. So it was writing and performing kind of at the same time always. And in college, like I said earlier, I majored in writing and minored in acting. Well, I had a double minor, acting and French. Like, I don't actually speak French very well anymore, but I was pretty good back then. But writing came first. It did. Absolutely. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I thought it was very interesting in looking at your most recently released works that are both in print and in audio, how all 3 of you are touching in the fantasy genre to some extent. there's certainly something fantastical in all of your books, even though they're very different from one another. So wondering if you could each talk a little bit about what brought you to that particular genre. And you can even give a little teeny tiny synopsis of the books that we're talking about today. So for Petrea, it's Camelot and Vine. And since you're here on screen, if you want to start with how you chose the setting, the language, the accents, and all of that, and then we'll see what the others came up with for their books.
Okay. Well, I want to say that I never set out to write in a particular genre. I just had a particular story, and that these days in the publishing industry, it's helpful if your story plugs into a genre, because then they know where to put it in the bookstore and how to advertise it online and stuff. But Camelot and Vine is the story of a Hollywood actress who's failing. She's not doing very well. And one day she loses her acting gig. She basically gets drunk, gets on a plane, falls through a gap in time, and lands on King Arthur, basically accidentally, clumsily saving his life. And, madness ensues. But I had the idea during a time in my life where I really, I'll be honest, this is a little vulnerable, but I wanted to have a male friend. And I did not know how to be friends with a man. I knew how to have a boyfriend and how to go on dates and stuff like that, but I didn't know how to be friends with a guy. And I had this fantasy about, the best guy ever, who is King Arthur, and that I would be his friend. And I would fantasize about that sometimes. And it became this story in my mind. And the main character in the story is not me. Because I don't think I would fare as well as she does. But it came out of this idea of what would it be like to really go to 500 AD? What did they eat? What did they wear? It is a historical fantasy because I studied the archaeology and the clothing and the foods and everything else I could find about post-Roman Britain. And I set my story there because I had fantasized about it.
And as the narrator for your own story, you certainly pulled out on all of that research and creating all of the voices and accents for your book as well.
How
did you figure that
out? I don't know. I heard certain voices in my mind the way that I thought they would be. And there were some things that I wrote in the book 10 years ago when I didn't know I'd be narrating it, that later I'm like, oh God, how am I going to do that? Yeah, but it helped to have a coach working with me on accents. Amanda Quaid, great coach on those accents. Yeah.
Right. And Matt, you started with superheroes. Why don't you tell us how you landed there with the Indestructibles?
So, I mean, I grew up loving all things pop, like all superheroes and fantasy and stuff like that. But as a screenwriter and an independent screenwriter, I was doing romantic comedies because you can shoot those for low budget. And when I made the switch from screen to books, I'm like, what is the exact opposite of a zero budget romantic comedy? A superhero book where things blow up and people fly. So like I'm like, when budget doesn't matter for a novel, because for years it was like, okay, can we get a zoo? No, we can't get a zoo. Okay, how about a farm? Like, you're doing budget stuff for screenwriting. I'm like, okay, nobody can tell you no when you're writing a book. If you want to have something take place on an oil rig, you can. And so that was how I ended up doing that. And I grew up being a big comic book nerd and I am a mediocre artist. So I wasn't going to be a comic book artist, but I loved that world. So I always joke around like I wrote a superhero novel because I couldn't draw a comic. But really what it was is I was switching over from micro budget to I wanted something huge, and that's it ended up being YA by accident. I wrote it to entertain myself, and say what that will with whatever that says about me as a person. Like, wrote it to entertain myself, but it's mostly for younger readers. But I mean, most of my readers are adults anyway. But that was how I ended up there, was the switch to having no barriers. And then what was really fun, because it's an ensemble book and we're doing the full cast, so I'm only one character, but getting to pick who's going to play these characters, like these signature voices, was actually kind of terrifying, because first of all, that's what the readers are going to identify with for going forward. And also, like, how do I make the right pick? Like, but I've been a casting director too. So it was actually kind of like, oh, I can do this. But it was still kind of surreal, because it's very different from having someone in the room doing a cold read with you off the page of a script, having, samples done. And it was a very surreal experience with that. And then we recorded my sections first. And the producer's like, well, this is so other people can hear how you narrate the characters that are in the scene with them. Like, oh no, that's too much pressure. So now I have to, because all the characters are meant to be kind of ciphers. I wanted the readers to see themselves in them. So it was actually kind of scary to sort of like set in stone what accent they used or what tone of voice they used, because they're all very deliberately written as young characters that people could see themselves in. So I wanted to make sure that there wasn't too much weight on that, so that the readers could identify on their own. But it was very cool to both voice one and then help identify who's going to be the best person to be the others.
Sure. Now, Stephanie, in West of the Sea, now Matt just mentioned having young readers or listeners be able to identify with the main characters in the book. Talk to us about how you wove that into the folklore of West of the Sea.
Well, okay. So in choosing to like pull over from your previous question and wrap it into this question, literary legacy definitely plays a big part of it. Like all my favorite books, all of them are speculative. A lot of them are speculative fiction for kids, like A Wrinkle in Time. I know that book forwards and backwards. It's in my book. And my book has a lot of similarities to that. If you look at it, if you put Wrinkle in Time on a highway in Texas, you'd be like, oh, there's a similar structure happening here. And I think that's just because it is in my bones. This is how I learned a story could be and could be loved. So my story definitely comes from like somewhat of a history of, it sounds so dramatic to be like a history of trauma, but like when I was 12, 13, I became something of an emotional caretaker for my mother. And my mother had a lot of delusions and was deeply emotional all the time. And I found myself wishing then, and as a teenager and in my 20s, I was like, God, I wish there were a magical explanation for why she is the way she is. I wish what she believed was true. I wish all these magical things could, like, if I could just believe this with her, then that would make things so much easier. But I know this is a delusion, so there was this instinct towards fantasizing a very difficult thing that I was going through and experiencing. So in trying to write a story about a mother who's mentally ill, it always came out like looking at it from the side. I even tried to write it without fantasy elements, and I couldn't. Like it was part of my own mythology. But I think it is unfortunately a very common experience as a kid to feel this is a beautiful thing about kids, to feel that you want to take care of the people who love you and who you love so deeply. And so if a parent is suffering, if you want to make it better, and to some degree you internalize, did I do this? Is this my fault? And can I fix it? And believing that you can fix it is a way of trying to exert power over that situation. It's like over a situation in which you actually have no power. But as a kid, you're like, oh, but if I just do these things, it'll get better, right? You're trying to exert power. So I think the character of Haven, okay, I should say what the book is about. Sorry, the book is about a 12-year-old girl whose mother is deeply depressed in like the wheat fields of Texas. And Haven, the 12-year-old, has started seeing dinosaurs when she's near fossils. And that's kind of scary because her mom seems very mentally unwell and she's afraid she's going to become like her mom. And then in the middle of the night, she sees her mother looking completely reptilian. And then the next day, her mother is gone. So she goes searching for her mother, inadvertently triggers her own transformation into something rather monstrous looking, is witnessed by a new friend who convinces her that will help her figure this out. And she and her big sister and this friend steal a coffee truck and go across Texas to find out where is mom, what is mom, and what is Haven? How does this all play out? And it was very much, So that's not real, obviously, like that's fantasy, but it was a way of talking about when someone you love has an expression and, you know, something that occasionally makes them monstrous, and you're afraid you might have it in you too. What should you do in that situation? And what are your responsibilities? What are your boundaries? And like, and ultimately it's that as a kid, you should never be carrying that burden. It's not your job. You should not be responsible for your parents' emotions. All you can do is love them and be honest about how they're affecting you. So that's why fantasy, that's how I pulled like my kid readers in. I think it's something, unfortunately, a lot of kids experience in many different presentations, whether it's, you know, kids with parents who have substance abuse issues, or they're just, you know, depressed, which a lot of adults are, you know, so there you go.
So your book is the one that I most recently listened to. And I also had the privilege of being a beta listener for Petrea's book, Camelot and Vine. Stephanie, one of the many things that has impressed me about your work is the cover art. And I wanted to shift gears into the marketing angle of publishing and audiobooks in particular. So tell us briefly about how you came to the cover art for West of the Sea, and really how you found marketing to be either the same or different for print versus audio. And I know that's a loaded question, so maybe just, you know, in summary, how might you talk about marketing for print and audio? And just briefly also, how did you choose that cover for your book?
Well, I mean, I don't have much choice over the cover art because I'm with Penguin. So they have a whole team, but I was incredibly lucky when I saw the author, Dion MBD. When I saw his previous covers, it was all I could have ever wished for. I couldn't believe I was having such an amazing artist. Did I say author this whole time? Artist, you know, working on the cover. And he just delivered this stunning, there's an element of queerness through the book as well. And I love that the colors are like the bisexual flag colors. You know, I'm bi, and so like seeing those colors on the cover just makes me so happy as well. But when I saw it, like I was astonished. The thing I did have some input over was the initial like mock-ups. The background was kind of vague, and I was like, the landscape is actually incredibly important to this story. So I sent some pictures of like where this story takes place in real life, and then he pulled it in beautifully, and he was able to pull out all of the creatures she's seeing like in the headlights of the coffee truck. It's so cool. So really he took it beyond. That's him. I'm just very lucky. In terms of marketing, I'm very new to this, so I don't know. Like for audiobooks, I'm very comfortable talking about that on TikTok. I love being on TikTok. I love the platform. I'm trying to talk more about writing. I'm like, that would be a good idea, but for some reason that's harder for me. So I'm working that. I simply retweet everything that you do and Petrea does. I'm like, oh, you guys know what you're doing. Retweet, quote, share. I do get on Canva to create some of my own graphics. I did that more for the book. I do it for audiobooks as well. You know, I gravitate towards the platform that I'm comfortable with. Instagram, honestly, still confused by. I know lots of people are really good at that. I really love TikTok, so I'm trying to use that one more. I'm excited to hear other people's comments on marketing.
Yeah,
I'm truly at the beginning of marketing my book, and
well, let's hear Petrea's angle in terms of having created something and then having updated it. So the cover for Camelot and Vine, talk to us about that, Petrea.
Okay. Well, when I first put out the book 10 years ago, I had the good fortune to get the artist Kate Wong to design the cover. And Kate was fresh out of college, out of design school. And so she wanted to give this a try. And she has gone on to be a graphic designer with her own business and everything like that. And she designed the original book cover for me. But 10 years later, she's not really doing book covers. And I had a cover designer who was interested in updating the cover for me, just with new fonts and stuff like that. So I got Kate's permission to get Paula Johnson to update the cover. So I actually have two cover artists, both of whom are terrific. And we used Kate's original art. Can I show it to you?
Sure.
it's the original. This is the original from 10 years ago. And Paula took the horse and rider and basically just updated the cover gently. And I think it really, I don't know, I love it, because here's Casey in where she shouldn't be, in armor and makeup.
Sure. Now, what about the marketing? Because I know this is something you're doing from scratch. What's your experience been in terms of, different platforms?
10 years ago, I had no idea. And I really didn't. I had a blog, and people were blogging then, and I had a lot of followers and everything. So that was great. But now social media is so much more prevalent. I'm the opposite of Stephanie. I'm really comfortable on Instagram because I'm a photographer as well. And I'm not, excuse me, as comfortable on TikTok. I have an account, but I don't really use it. I look at other people's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so time consuming to get it right that I haven't spent that much time on it. So Facebook and Instagram are really where I'm at mostly. And also, I'm more of a photographer, and I'm not so crafty. And Canva, I have tried, and I haven't failed exactly, but it's not my real strength. So I putting together ads for me is more like it's being myself. I have to just be myself. My neighbor is a Renaissance fair guy, and he loaned me a crown and a couple of swords. So I've taken some pictures with crown and swords and just tried to do a little bit of funny stuff with them. And that's more my style. And I think that's kind of what you have to do with social media. You have to just do it your way. And there's a lot of different options, which is great. And we don't have to use them all, I hope.
Now, speaking of social media, and I want to pop over to Matt. Now, what I've noticed that Matt has been up to, it has been attending a lot of cons. So Matt, maybe you could talk to us about going out to events to promote your work, cons in particular. And absolutely, if you want to talk about your cover art or other marketing strategies as well, please do.
You got it. It's funny. I would have blown right by. I'm sort of thinking like marketing. Like my biggest marketing push I wrote a superhero book, and I told the original publisher, I don't think literary and book events are going to be where we do numbers. I think we need to go to Comic-Con. And I have not been to the big two. I haven't been to New York or San Diego because those are, it costs more for a table there than it does to record an entire audiobook. So we'll put it that way. But I do ones that I can load up a car and get to, so I don't have to ship books to the other side of the country. So I'll go up and down the Northeast. And people come in costume as my characters. I don't have any official design, so people will come in cosplay as their characters. The same people come back every year. If I don't have something new, I get shamed. Like, there's no new book this year. I'm like, sometimes it takes more than 12 months. I had a kid walk up to me one year where I just put out a little novella, and he just picks up the novella and goes, "That's it for what was new." And I'm like, "Oh, you better come back next year. I get 3. There's 3 on the schedule for the next year." And he didn't show up the next year. So like, I wanted to show him. But yeah, they're the most exhausting thing that I do. They're more work than anything else that I do for the books, but they're also the most energizing because I walk away from that wanting to continue my career. Because we have all had that day. It's like, why am I doing this to myself? This is so much work. I do a con and I'm like, okay, what's next? How do I do this? And I see, for the books that I have access to the numbers, the monthly reports, I see the sales go up from those cons every year. And during the pandemic, when there weren't cons, I'm like, wow, I'm having a bad year. I'm like, oh, I'm just not out there having FaceTime with people. Sure. So that was and I love them. They're exhausting. They keep getting longer. When I first started doing them, they were all 2 days, and they're 3 days. Some of them are 4 days. I'm like, stop, slow down. But those are my biggest marketing. They're my biggest part of my marketing budget, and my biggest most beneficial marketing push. And it's because of, I don't think other books, it's all genre dependent, like you were saying earlier, like what shelf are you on, and being a superhero book at a Comic-Con is just sort of like a natural fit. I don't know that I would do it so well at another themed convention, but and for the covers, I when the second edition came out, when I switched, I got the rights back about 4 or 5 years ago and just republished them myself. When you're doing most of your own marketing on your own anyway, and the book's hitting that age where the publisher isn't supporting them, you might as well do it on your own if you can. But that gave me a chance to do a unified cover. I worked with an artist named Christian Sterling Haig. I drew the little, each book in the Indestructible series has one of the characters in silhouette, because I don't want to put a face on them. I want the reader to see themselves in them. But I would do the silhouette, and I'm like, now put this in something cool. So I hand draw the silhouettes, and then he would create some sort of thematic color scheme to go with it, and do the layout. So that was fun. People still ask about the original covers because they were very dark and kind of creepy. But I like the new stuff because it feels like a unified thread through all 5 books in the series, that they all belong together, and each character gets their moment to shine on the cover and all that kind of
Sure,
stuff.
sure.
And
Stephanie had mentioned that she's someone who enjoys working on TikTok, and Petrea indicated that Instagram might be her platform of choice. Do you have a social media outlet that you would direct people to that's your favorite platform?
so fun. So I've been doing the book social media stuff for long enough that it was when Joe Hill gave the best advice I've ever heard. You're not there to sell your book, you're there to join the conversation. And so for me, it was always Twitter. Right now we're facing the death of a social media giant right now. So I don't know. I'm also on anything that looks like that. I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Spoutable, I'm on Post. Despite being a film actor, I'm not comfortable on TikTok. I also write about cybersecurity, so TikTok gives me the hives, but it's where I need to learn it, because I feel like that's where so much is happening. So I feel like I need to learn that for marketing, but I don't enjoy it. I'm also a photographer, so I actually love Instagram, but neglect it because the conversation is harder to have there because mostly what I do is I talk to people. I talk about writing. I talk about pop culture. I talk about storytelling. I talk about politics. So for me, social media is more, I look for engagement, for conversation. Like let's talk about the world, not even about the books. And maybe if you like what I have to say, you might want to pick up my books as well. So I definitely favor the more text-based stuff, because I like that quick conversation. I do fully acknowledge I need to get I'm on TikTok, and I just laugh that the algorithm doesn't know who I am. I get random videos. Like I'm clearly, the algorithm doesn't even know I'm an author at this point, so.
So I want to make sure we have time to see if there's any questions from those joining us through Zoom. So I have a couple questions before we bounce over to that. But I'd like to hear from each one of you what's coming up next. More writing, more narrating, a little bit of both. And what is the thing that most excites you about what's coming next? And we'll start with Stephanie.
Coming up next, let's see. I'm in the middle of a couple reverse harem romance audiobooks. So that's what I am in the middle of right now. I'm looking forward to this Christmas romance that I'll be narrating. And on Monday, I get to do some horror short stories. So I'm loving just like jumping all over the place in terms of audiobooks. I do have a pseudo, Avery Karras does a lot of romance. And under my own name, I'll do the horror, the kidlit, the YA, the literary fiction. So keeping busy there, which is good. For writing, I'm so excited, but it's so hard. I'm working on a middle grade horror novel that takes place at a dance school. Like I said, I was a dancer, so I'm not trying to be like redo Suspiria over here. Like I'm pulling from my lived experience, which were not horrifying. I love ballet, but I really love, I can't tell from this demeanor or this voice, but I love fury and rage and anger in women. Like I love feminine rage so much. And I hate the idea that like we all have to be nice and get along for anything to get accomplished. So this is a school that has been infiltrated by something horrible, and it eats the souls of the girls, right? Like during the Nutcracker, specifically at their first Nutcracker performance, their souls are eaten by the thing in the walls. And one of the characters in this story knows what's going to happen because her older sister is a legacy there, but got to come home very briefly and warned her. And so she knows something bad's going to happen. She's trying to stop it, but she's trying to do it by outsmarting it. And then there's another character who's just like, what is going on? So the whole point is you can't win by playing by a monster's rules. You have to burn the whole thing down, and you can't win by getting along. You need chaos. You need a billion, like we can all work together and be different and be like, we don't have to be a consensus. We can all be mad together and get things done. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to write it, but I've only written in first person. I've only written from the point of view of one character. So trying to write multiple point of views from third person is a literary craft challenge for me. So yeah, that's really tough. Writing is tough. Whenever I'm writing, it feels like sludge. And whenever I'm writing, I'm like, I should just be an audiobook narrator. And then when I'm in the booth recording hours on end, I'm like, this is someone else's book. I want to work on my book, so I'm just like never happy and always trying to like find time for the other thing. It's all hard, all of it.
The new work sounds amazing. As a dance mom, I've got a ready audience for that, myself included. But Petrea, talk to us about what is next for you. What are you excited about? More writing, more narrating, both?
Both. Yeah, while Stephanie was talking, I am reminded that I have gotten to narrate some things about female rage a little bit. Right now, I'm just starting to narrate a book by Catherine Howe called A True Account, and it's about a female pirate, historical fiction. And so this is all set, here I am sitting in LA, and you guys are all in the area where the book takes place, in the Boston area. Well, and on the high seas, of course. Fascinating book, and all based on history and William Fry and the hanging of William Fry and his cohorts in Boston in the 1700s. So it gives me chills. It's such a great book, and I'm having such a good time with it. And as far as writing is concerned, I think sometimes when I'm narrating, I am so focused on the book that I'm narrating that it's really hard to write and narrate at the same time. So for me, this is a challenge to find writing time during narration work, because narration is what's bringing in the income right now. And so if I want to write, I have to write and narrate, So I can't just do one or the other. So that's a challenge for me. And I'm almost finished with a novel about a library archivist who finds, or I should say archivist, who finds a photograph that challenges who she thought her family was. And I'm going to leave it at that because I haven't finished yet, and I don't know exactly who the bad guy is.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what is next for you, and then we have some questions in the Q&A that I want to see if we can squeeze in as well. So, Matt, what is coming up next for you in terms of writing, narrating, performing, both, all?
A little bit of everything. I am due for another pro tip for authors: don't write 2 ongoing series at the same time. I owe a different series, the next book in the series, The Dungeon Crawlers. It's a pop culture fantasy series that I write in addition to the Indestructibles. So I'm borderline overdue for the next book in that series. So that's the next one up. I'm pulling together a short story collection set in the Indestructibles world for next year. I want to have something for Comic-Con. And I'm watching the sales of the Indestructibles like a hawk to see if we can do the rest of the series in terms of audiobook narration. I was the lead story designer for a collaborative storytelling podcast last year. And that was one of the most rewarding combinations of writing and narration that I've ever done. So I'm in the larval stages of trying to figure out how to do another project like that, because that was real-time storytelling with other writers on a podcast that with no script or no outline was actually kind of amazing to do, because talk about taking the training wheels off and letting things go. So that's the audio project that I'm most intrigued by right now, because that was so much fun telling stories with other writers in real time and just bouncing ideas off of each other. That was amazing. So
fantastic. So we've got a series of questions in the Q&A, and some of them I'm going to see if we can bounce between the three of you with maybe one-word responses, and some are a little more involved than that. So first up, I'm going to have you just sort of pick one or the other, and I'm going to share with you Claire's question, which is, if you had a choice to earn your living doing one or the other, which would you do, writing or narrating? And Matt, since you're up, why don't you tell us what you think you'd do?
Oh, if I had to pick one or the other, it would be writing. I'm a writer at heart. So
Okay, got it. And Petrea, writing or narrating?
Hi, Claire. I would write and narrate my own books.
And Stephanie, do you have a pick?
If I had to pick,
If you had to.
it would be writing, but I need both. So I'm glad I have both.
Excellent. And from Danielle, when you are narrating your own work, do you ever have the feeling that you want to change what you had written? And if so, do you ever find that you do end up tweaking something that you've already written?
I'll go. I found a typo. I found like an actual error, like in the age. You know what? I don't even want to tell you. It's in the first edition. If you go and find it, let me know what it is. Like, see if you can catch it, because you should be able to catch it from information I gave. You should be able to figure out that this is inaccurate. We caught it, but it was too late to fix it for the print. So it will be in all the first editions, but it has been fixed for ebooks, and we fixed it in the in the audiobook. So it was more like I found that there were a couple things that I wish I had teased out more, where I was like, oh, I wish I kind of let that thing drop. I never wrapped that up completely the way I wanted to. So more like that. I worked on the book for ages. I love the way it is. But yeah, that's my answer to that. Find the typo, find the error. Let me know. I'll let you know if you're right.
Petrea, what about you? What did you, when you were narrating your own book, what did you find that you might want to have changed, or did you find something that you needed to change?
I did re-edit before I started to narrate. And there was one part where I had a character, I had written the way she sounded, and people thought it was a typo. So I just fixed it because I didn't want it to distract readers, and it had distracted enough readers that she said, I recognize you instead of I recognize you. And so I just put the G back in, and, it wasn't worth it. But that was pretty much it. Then once I had the print version ready, I felt like I had to stick with it.
Okay. And off the top of your heads, if something comes to you, from each of you, do you have a favorite audiobook that you have listened to, and what might that be? And that comes to us from Dom.
So far, Strange the Dreamer, narrated by Steve West, Laini Taylor's book. That was when I fell in love with like I had never had that experience before, where I extended chores to keep listening. I turned lights off and sat in the dark and just listened. It was my preferred activity, and that had never happened before. Strange the Dreamer, love the book, had read the book. Steve West's narration blew my mind.
And Matt or Petrea, anything come to mind?
I can't think of one off the top of my head. I will say that it'd be
totally okay, because there's so many.
I was going to say that anything that does the full cast experiment, like what they've done with some of the Sandman comics, that sort of concept really fascinates me. So I'll say that's currently where my brain is at for obvious reasons. So
excellent. Okay, so we have one more in the Q&A that I'd like us to get to. This is from Carol. Do you first hear your characters, or do you write them first? So being that you're in both of these worlds, what comes first to you, their voices or how they're playing out on paper?
It's totally simultaneous.
I was going to say, coming out of screenwriting, you kind of write out loud anyway, right? Like you probably do the same thing. You
Yes.
So something I want to toss out to all of you before we wrap up, and I think that Diane's probably going to pop back in and do some wrapping up of things. But for the three of you, do any of you have questions for one another now that you're in this space together?
Oh gosh, tons. I could talk about this forever.
Sarah, I have a question for you.
For me, sure.
Yes. What is your next project?
Oh, well, let's see. There's a few going on simultaneously. So I just yesterday wrapped up a very fun horror short that's going to go into part of a podcast series. So that's something that I really enjoyed. I'm also in the midst of a really heady nonfiction about relationship violence. And then moving forward, I have a canine adventure book that's coming up. So nothing boring. There's always, it's very diversified in terms of a career path. I think that's something that we've all found, that all of us would say, is that it's not dull. There's always something that's very different from the thing before it. So.
Sounds like a great professional. Unless there's anything else, Sarah, I know you had just asked a question and I sort of barged in, but I wanted to make sure that we got you in there. Stephanie, was there an answer to Sarah's question, or
whether I hear them? Was that the question? No, no. But what was lovely about narrating my own book, I feel like the hardest thing about narrating audiobooks is that often you are alone and you're making all of the directorial choices yourself. And so there's script analysis, what's happening in the scene. There's acting choices that you are making in a void and hoping you're making the right ones. And that is exhausting, like tracking the beat changes, tracking these arcs, making sure you're taking the listener on a narrative journey. Like there's just so much decision making and you're doing it on the fly and you have no feedback. And so that is exhausting. But with my book, I knew exactly what was going on in every scene. I knew what everyone was feeling. I knew what the beats were. I knew how they sounded. I did know like how they would be saying it because I had written it. So the words came first and, they were refined, but I knew what their intentions were. And so it made recording it this like smooth as butter experience that I assume I will never have again. Like that is like, it's only because it was my book and I knew it, like down to my bones. So yeah, that's that.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all, Sarah, for being your usual wonderful moderator self, Matthew, Petrea, and Stephanie. And thanks so much for being part of the Salem Lit Fest this year, 2023. And frankly, sharing the joys and challenges of being an audiobook narrator and writer. I think it's given us a new appreciation of, what goes into the making of audiobooks. So thank you for that. We have a big shout out to our sponsors, supporters, and partners who help to keep the Lit Fest free. You can find that list on salemlitfest.org. Thanks to our Zoom audience for joining us today. If you're able to donate to the festival, that is great. And thanks for supporting these narrators and authors. If you're so inclined, you can buy the author's books at Wicked Good Books in Salem, Copper Dog Books in Beverly, or from your favorite booksellers, also bookshop.org. Coming up in just a moment or two, our second virtual panel of the day, Fantasy, Writing Across the Genre. And then we have an in-person event that's coming up at 1:00, Enduring Hawthorne, as in Nathaniel Hawthorne, at the House of the Seven Gables in Salem. That does require a separate registration, so you'll want to go to our website for that. Thanks again, everyone. Have a fabulous day, no matter where you are. I hope the sun is shining on the West Coast, Petrea.
It's not.
Oh, it's not here either.
Here last night.
Thanks so much. We hope to see you again soon at the
Thank you.
Fest.
And thank you, everyone.
And thanks to all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.